Welcome back and thanks for staying with us. This is the 9 o'clock hour and it's time for the Girlfriend Show. On Wednesdays right here on Rapid Dawn, we normally have the girls seated round around this table and we have conversations centered around basically things of life, how it affects the woman, how it affects the man. And classic thing we do here is drag both the men and the women. We're not biased. So welcome to that segment again. My name is Martha Alu and I have two very beautiful ladies seated right here in the studio with myself, and together we will champion the conversation for this morning. Now I'm starting at my this is left. My rear left, I have Deborah Agada, and she is a medical personnel. Thank you, Deborah, for joining us on the show this morning. And then we have Ifeanyi Chukwu Rose. She's a growth marketer. Thank you so much for joining us on the conversation.
Thank you for having me this morning.
They look pretty quiet. Are you guys sure we're going to have this team we need on the show this morning?
We will.
You have? Yes. All right. Now, I know
We're
that...
going to bring it in.
We bring it in.
Yeah, definitely.
I love that. I love that. And I'm here, seated here, looking at them eyeball to eyeball, just so we can have it on as good as possible. But yeah, I know that Solomon Buchi, I know we've called him one of the most controversial content creators in our age. You know, he has an opinion on literally everything that is said on social media. To say the least. Now, some people come up, if you look at his comments, a lot of people have admiration for him, you know, for some of the stands that he takes, especially when it comes to Christianity and morality. But personally, I do think that people should know when to sit out certain conversations, because there's some that you're not fully aware of. It's just like throwing open a ballot and asking men, do you prefer CS or the normal vaginal birth? You know, and a man would be saying to you, oh, I don't like CS. Like, you don't even know it. How can you prefer something you know? Absolutely. Exactly. So experience puts you in a position. There are things you say, I would never do, you know. And then when you find yourself doing it, it looks like an entirely different thing, because you got to a different stage in your life that made you understand certain things better. So yes, we will be talking about Solomon Buchi and, you know, the video he made about, you know, a couple who discovered that they had a child who had an abnormality, right? And they eventually found that out, and I think it was 5 weeks in on the pregnancy, and then they decided to abort that child, to terminate it. Yeah. And according to him, it is murder. You know, you should never do that, and all of that. He had so many things to say about it. But let me throw it open to you guys. What are your thoughts on this?
Okay, so I would just say that it depends on the perspective of the individual, but coming from my own point of view, I would say that we need to consider the parents first. The parents are the people that are involved in the birth of the child. That's the mother and the father, but primarily the mother. We have to think about their emotional mindset, the way they think about things, the way they understand it. If they are even prepared to go through that entire process of giving birth to a child with a chromosomal disorder, we need to consider how parents feel about it, and then the guilt that they have to face, because not only are they being faced with the fact that they might have to terminate a pregnancy or commit murder, as some would say, but some of them may not even be faith-based, that is being ruled by religion. They might just see it from a very logical perspective, into say that this child is going to come in and bring in a lot of stress. If the child could come in and bring in a lot of discomfort to the home, they might need lifelong assistance in terms of, depending on the disability that they are facing. So it just depends on, are the parents willing to go down that path for, you know, a lifelong commitment to that child, or would the child be eventually able to live independently on their own? So these are just the constructs that we have to think about, especially as the parents. But from my perspective, I would always say that it's up to the parents, especially the mother, because they are the ones that are going to be faced with that responsibility for the rest of their lives.
All right, yeah, let's hear you.
And to throw back to the point you made earlier, it's such an easy thing to sit on a high horse and say, oh, this thing you've done is wrong, until you've been the person to be in that position. Because you can speak from the assumption that the parents are happy they made this decision, but you have no idea what they went through to come to the conclusion. And we have to look at the society that we live in. To say that you want to bring someone into the world who will be special needs, Nigeria is not progressed enough even for the average Nigerian, talk less of people that would need extra support for even longer periods of time. You don't know their financial situation. This is not to say that he doesn't have a basis for his commentary. Of course, everybody has their religious backgrounds, and you also have to remember that not everybody sees the world the way you see the world. So you need to be able to get off your high horse and say, sure, this may be what I would do, but I need to be able to put myself in someone else's shoes and consider the fact that this is their decision essentially. So
respect their decision.
And respect their decision. Yeah, you can come out with your opinion. You can also say it in a way that's respectful and also addressing the fact that, okay, this is them and this is me. So that's one of the most important things to consider.
All right. I think we have the video now. Let's just play the video. Yes, let's watch it to put context to this conversation.
Must have seen the news of this YouTube influencer couple who aborted their child on discovering that he has a Down syndrome diagnosis. And at the foundation, the very basis of the argument a lot of people are making is the idea of eugenics. What is the difference between you and Adolf Hitler if you think that a child does not deserve to live just because they have a genetic disorder? This idea of wanting children that have desirable traits because of the kind of life you have envisaged for them, that is not compassion. That is control. That is you playing God. Every life is created and formed in the image of God. A child with Down syndrome is not less of a child, and this is the very idea of eugenics, that humans with less desirable traits should be killed. And if you are supporting the killing of children with Down syndrome, then it's very okay. It's very okay for, say, a white person to support the black children because they think that black children are genetically inferior, that the black race is inferior. If you support the idea that we should decide who lives and who is, then what is the basis of that decision? And this is not to deny the difficulty of raising a child with a disability. It is going to be hard. I'm not saying it's an easy decision to make, but we cannot justify children just because they have a disability. Because number one, you are playing God, you are deciding who gets to live, and you are desecrating the sanctity of human life. God told Jeremiah, before you were formed in your mother's womb, I knew you and I made you a prophet. Especially as Christians, I'm seeing Christians saying, well, it's an act of mercy, it's an act of compassion. If you believe that every human life should be treated equally, irrespective of their skin color, why do you not believe that about babies, irrespective of their disability? Every single human life has inestimable value and dignity, not because of our skin color, not because of our health conditions, not because of where we live, not because of our race, not because of what other people think of us, because we were created in the image of God. If you murder a baby because it's not a perfect baby, whatever perfection means to you, then you don't deserve to be a parent. You should not be a parent. Rest in peace to that little boy. It's so sad that your parents did not find you perfect enough to live.
Okay, so first of all, there's so many things I think are wrong with this video. Number one, your approach speaking about the dead that you care about so much is very, very poor. You know, rest in peace, your parents didn't find you worthy to be brought. And each time conversations like this, because he got a lot of backlash for this video, he would come out to say things like, you are saying he should be empathetic towards somebody that killed another person, and you know, all of that stuff that he kept saying out there. But I saw him start the conversation from point A and took it to point Z. Like, some of the points that he was making were not adding up. And I'll take it from where he started the conversation. As Christians, if you read your Bible, there's a part in the book of Exodus where the Bible was talking about, I made you. It's not that. He said, if a person is born blind, a person is born mute or whatever, if deformity within, it is still within God's sovereign design. So he's the one who had those children, or both the blind, the deaf. He created all of these people. So in that scripture, it was just basically talking about how, regardless of all of these forms or these deformities that these people have, I'm the one who can heal them, right? And remember one time again, the disciples were asking God, this person, Jesus, this person was born blind. Is it because of his sins, or is it because of the sin of his parents? And Jesus said, it is neither because of his sins or the sins of his parents that he was born like that. It is just so that God would be glorified. So from that passage, they might not even believe in God in the first place, the people we're talking about. And even if they believe in God, there is absolutely nowhere in the Bible that the Bible was explicit about medical termination of pregnancies. The only part of the Bible that I found to talk about this early termination or fetal termination is when a man and another man are fighting and it causes the miscarriage of another woman. And in that passage of the Bible spoke about a fine. It's never about judgment and never about condemnation. So when people use Christianity as a basis to have certain conversations, it just exposes how flawed they are and how they haven't sought more knowledge regarding a certain matter. Because you have to understand the times in which some of these things happened. Medical termination was never a thing at that time. Things had not come up. In medicine, you're a medical practitioner. There are newer ways things are being done. Just today,
developing.
Yes, we spoke about contact lenses that no longer are just for fashion or just to replace the glasses, but can also detect eye conditions early. Medicine is evolving, which means that things can be done better. So your wife is using a sanitary towel, but before, women were excluded. Napkins, apart from napkins, they were separated somewhere.
In a room.
Exactly.
Room.
They bleed till the whole month is over. Why did you use that? Why are you using sanitary towels? It's not in the scripture. You know, so my confusion with him is he just makes everything, turns everything into a jargon because he's mixing scripture, he's mixing this, he's mixing that all together. So he's talking a lot of jargon and he doesn't even know that that's what he sounds like.
And I think a lot of people like to pick and choose which passage they want to apply.
When it benefits
because
them.
Jesus told us clearly not to judge people. You are never in a position, or rather, again, it comes down to taking yourself off your high horse and just thinking, like putting yourself in that person's shoes essentially. Jesus has told us not to judge. So if you think you are morally superior enough to tell this person what you've done is wrong. Yes, you can call out each other, but don't ever see yourself as morally superior to come and tell someone, oh, what you've done is outrightly. You don't know what drove them to that decision. And I understand his conversation, like in terms of eugenics, but I think we need to draw the line between favorable characteristics and disabilities and what our world like how people would interact with the world based on how it is currently. That's a very line that we actually have to draw eventually if we want to bring that into this conversation.
Okay, so let's do it already.
Okay.
Okay, so from my perspective, I just think that he's bringing in various angles and trying to merge it into what he believes in, because it's not about what is right or what is wrong. It's about what Solomon thinks and what he believes is right. And for me, it was just a disservice to humanity and to even the parents in question, because he's talking about religion, he's talking about science, he's talking about logic. He's bringing in so many fast factions into one construct and trying to make it a thing. But if we're even looking at it from a scientific point of view, is a medical person here, when the child is 5 weeks old, if your medical practitioner says we need to take this, there's an option of taking this baby out because of lifelong disabilities, because of prolonged causes to the mother, just different angles that could cause problems in the long run for the parents, for the child. You have the right, it's your human rights as a parent, as someone that's bringing life into the world, to say, I do not want this child to come here to suffer. And then we also have to consider that the fact that it takes a village to raise one child. And we're talking about a child that's coming in with problems. Are we even considering the child in question, how they would feel when they come into the world and come into that consciousness to say that I am not like everyone else. I am different. Why was I even born if the question of me not being existing was there? And I get it. The religion or the faith-based angle comes into the play that, okay, this child should be given the choice to even choose and say, okay, I do not want to come in. But then we also have the parents in question who are given that choice, because they are the ones with the burden, they are the ones with the guilt, they are the ones with the pressure. No one is talking about these angles. They are pressured, and even if they decide to take the child out, they have to deal with that guilt and that pressure for a very long time. So from my perspective, Solomon is just dealing with, I will call it clickbait and rage bait. He's just trying to look for conversation. He's trying to bring more people to his channel, to his page. He's trying to bring up different angles and different factions up in his comment section to talk. And even bring about this conversation that we are having now, so that we have a conversation about him and make him more relevant in society. So for me, that's just what I feel that video was about. If we're going to talk about the parents in question, then let's talk about the parents, but not necessarily about Solomon, because Solomon just tried to make it all about himself.
But the funny thing is, there are people in Solomon's comment or under Solomon's video supporting what Solomon has said. And you know my problem with us as Nigerians many times, we don't know how to separate legality from morality.
Yes.
We just join everything together. Not everyone believes in God. Not everyone is a Christian. Not everyone is a Muslim. Some people don't even believe in anything. They're atheists.
Yeah,
they don't believe in anything. They don't believe in science. They don't believe in absolutely anything. So making that decision on their behalf, if for a person to be a leader, it means that they understand different or diverse perspectives to things before they arrive at a conclusion. Now, I understand the concept of eugenics, where people want selective features or favorable features, you know, in their child. So when the child does not have that, they just go on and terminate the pregnancy, terminate the child, or whatever it is. So we understand the fear of that, which of course would be most likely what drives his conversation to the point where he's taking it from. We understand that. But you see, for people with disabilities, there's a particular child I followed for like a very long time. She's, her name is Amanda, the hydrocephalus survivor. Now, this girl was born with her head like almost 3 to 4 times what a normal child will be like. Can't walk, can't talk, can't eat, can't do absolutely nothing. So the child is just lying there, almost gone, you see. And then you put a parent in that emotional state by having them birth that child. And one thing I even want him and every other person to understand is, it is not just about what the parent wants. It's also about what is good enough for the child. This morning we had on the human angle, we had a story where a lady grew like full beards and everything. She's very bearded, much more than most men, you know, and because of how she is in society, you know, people treat her differently. Her husband left her. The society literally just turned on her because she's not a trait that we all see. So these are genetic traits. These are different. But when it comes to health, medical conditions, exactly, who will the child depend on? Can they grow outside a certain environment? Are they financially stable enough? Do you know how much it would take to treat a sickle cell patient, a child with sickle cell? There are drugs that they are on constantly.
The surgeries.
Exactly, the surgeries they would do.
In pain.
Constantly in pain. Would you rather that or save the child that? At all.
So I think when we want to discuss disabilities, I think the better approach would be, how can we make society more favorable for people that we want to bring into the world who are dealing with these things? Because it's one thing for you to say you have a child with this chromosomal abnormality, and judge someone for terminating that pregnancy, but you have to also consider what the parents saw to make them think they have to terminate that. So when we see situations like that, it just makes, I feel like it's a better approach to think, okay, what in society is wrong and what can we do to make it better? There are so many other environments, so many developed countries, so many better places where a Down syndrome diagnosis doesn't necessarily mean like something that should be terminated essentially. In Nigeria is a very different case because we are not as developed as we want. We don't have the resources to want to like raise, do you understand, to raise such a child. So when we want to discuss those conversations, we should probably address it in the case of how can we make it more favorable for these kinds of people. And even in the case of sickle cell, we constantly counsel people that their genotype is AS to please avoid having children with someone else that is AS to reduce the risk, because that is something that is completely avoidable. What they go through is completely avoidable. It's not a case of eugenics. It's literally the health.
Why did he not describe that as discrimination? Because an SS child is still a child.
It's one thing for just physical characteristics. It's another thing to do with health complications of a parent's decision. So we also need to consider the fact that someone's health is actually at risk when it comes to these kinds of things.
Okay. So from my perspective, I would say that when we just to buttress on her points, when we are thinking about bringing children with disabilities, for instance, I'll use myself as a parent. I would not, if I were to be pregnant and I discover that my child has a high risk of being disabled, my first thought would be the society, the environment that I'm bringing my child into. Do I want to bring my child into an environment like Nigeria, where we have very limited medical resources to even cater to the average human being, talk more of a child with disability? And then I need to consider my pockets, the pockets of myself, my husband, and my village in question. Do we have the financial means for trips abroad, for medical attention, for pain, for painkillers, for surgeries, for anatomy checks, you know? So, and most of these cases, when you're dealing with them, you're most likely working with one doctor, or you have a specified team of doctors that are working with you, and you have to keep in check with them, because switching doctors, changing angles will just make things look very, very high risk for the child. So these are the things that I'll consider when brought with the idea of bringing a child with disability into the world. And then I would not listen to society. I would think about myself and my child and what is best for my child. I won't listen to what this person A is saying in my ear, or what person B is saying in my ear, or what even religion or any form of faith-based culture, so anything is telling me. All I'm thinking about is the well-being of this child. Is this child going to have a fairly good life, even talk more of a great life as an adult, when I'm not here, when I'm old, when I'm dead and long gone? How would this child survive? Because the child will depend on their parents primarily over any other person. As much as you might have a good family, a good village, a stronghold, a strong household, how will your child survive without you in the picture? Let's say you're not feeling well, you're sick, or you even have a terminally ill disease and you now need attention. What happens to your child? So you have to think of the fact that you're automatically not living for yourself anymore. You're now living for a child, even to the point of adulthood, because that child has a disability. And you have to prioritize taking that child out of an environment that does not cater to them, that does not value disabilities, and bringing them to an environment where their priorities are placed on a high level, where they're placed on a benchmark, and they're not just limited to a specific construct, and saying that this is who you are, so you're being sidelined.
You can't go to normal schools.
Thank you. Or even when you go to school, you're being given a shadow teacher, because they have specialized teachers for that. Or even within hospitals, you have specialized doctors or nurses that will take care of you and give you that primary care. And I, as the parent, I have the resources to provide that access to you as my child. So for me, this is what I think about. And also access to doctors, access to a good environment is just very, 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 very important.
So yeah, so just to add to your point, that's why the most important thing I think in this conversation is actually just improving our environment and our society. Because when it comes to a child, essentially, I know the conversation is on birth defects and things that happen to children in utero, but it's also possible that even after birth or during the process of birth, your child could get an insult or an injury that could lead them to a disability. So for instance, if you're in the process of birth, the baby can go through something called birth asphyxia, where they don't get enough oxygen, and then they come down with conditions such as cerebral palsy. And even in those situations, the mother has agreed to carry the baby to term, but now she still is having to deal with this baby that is now special needs. So it will still all come down to our environment and making sure that society is a place where everybody can be included, those with disabilities, those without. That's when you can now look at parents that want to bring in children, irrespective of what their chromosomal makeup is like.
So the excuse will no longer be, oh, the society is not favorable enough. Because think about it, here in Nigeria, how many people that are deformed are allowed to occupy public offices? You know, we have in developed countries. Yes, in developed countries, you see that literally everywhere, the people with disability are factored in.
I think we're even going too far for public office. If you go to a building, how many places have rails for wheelchairs alone before we even go to offices? Even just simple accommodations for people with even inability to walk. We don't even have as much as that. Talk less of people that may have even more than that.
In the cinemas, you see, in most cases, if they now have to live in a certain place, they would have to provide these services for themselves. So their houses will now be built to fit the condition that they're in. But there's no place I've heard of here in Nigeria where you say, oh, these houses are built for people with disabilities.
Yeah.
It cannot be rented out to just anybody. It is for people with disabilities. And in most cases, they would live normal lives, right? But you see, places like the malls, places like the cinemas, places like social recreational centers where they also want to participate in these activities is not accommodating to them because nothing is being provided to help them through all of this. So yes, I agree that, you know, there's a part where we also need to pay attention to societal constructs. This part of the world, we just think that people with disabilities don't have a life anymore. Some of them have political ambitions. Some of them want to get married. Some of them want to have children. You know, I follow some of these pages and I see how these people are being treated. Some of them even get married outside Nigeria. Some of them are content creators because, you know, the government provides certain things that makes it easy for them to live with their conditions. Do you know how much a wheelchair costs here in Nigeria? One wheelchair, and I'm talking about manual wheelchairs, but these people have access to automatic or automated wheelchairs that can help them, you know, collapse when they are getting to a stairs. It's all encompassing, you know. So I think it's very insensitive to make a statement like this, just having known the condition it is. See, when people talk about Christianity most times, they make it look as if God is very wicked. And that when he says, exactly, when he says A, it is A. When he says B, it is B. And remember that even medicine in itself is this same God showing mercy to us as human beings. How would we know that when we take anti-malaria we'll be better? How would we know that if a woman is having complications, you know, and cannot do the normal vaginal birth, she has to do CS? How do you know that a person can do CS? You see, this is the same country that is still struggling with allowing women do CS freely. That's the country you want to give birth to a child with extreme deformities in. It's unfair to the child, it's unfair to the parent, you know, in some cases, and sometimes unfair to the society, because you bring such a child, some of them end up becoming, you know, so dependent on others, and the person that they're dependent on literally does not have a life outside of their own life. Yeah. So I think it was a very insensitive statement for him to have made. But yes, the next question will be a lot more personal because we've been talking about Solomon, we've been talking about what other people want. Let's talk about how you will address the situation if you find yourself there. We'll do that after we get back from this very quick break. All right, welcome back and thanks for staying with us. This is Rapid Done right here on Rapid TV. And of course, we're 30 minutes into the conversation for today. We have been spotlighting an issue that took center stage on social media, talking about, you know, Solomon Buchi, his perspective on what we call, I think, a fetal termination of pregnancy due to medical conditions. Now, some people have had very diverse perspectives, but I have had my guests tell me what their thoughts are regarding this conversation. Now, for the second part, we'll be making it a lot more personal, like I said before we went out on the break. So we want everyone to hear, I'm sure that they also want to hear what you would do when you find yourself in situations like this. Because like we established, Solomon is speaking about it because he probably haven't thought about what he would do if he's in this situation. So think about it for a moment. If you're in this kind of situation, would you terminate it? Would you keep it? What would you consider in doing that? I know you've spoken a bit about that.
Yes, thank you very much for that question. For me, I would say that my answer is not definitive. I would consider, first of all, where I am in life, what position in life I am, where is my career, where is my family, where is my mental health, my mental state, where am I at that moment in my life, and my age. I need to consider, do I have kids or do I not have kids at the moment? So I'm looking at this from a broad perspective, not from real time, like in the present right now. And then I also have to think about my partner. Okay. So it's not, I don't envision myself coming in as a single mother. I envision myself coming in with a partner. And then me and my partner have to sit down. We have to take a moment and sit down and say, okay, what are we going to do about this situation? How are we going to handle it between ourselves? And what options do we have? Then the next thing to consider is our financial capacity. Do we have the means? Do we have the resources? Do we have access to what we need to be able to raise a child like this? And then, yes, I'm a Christian, but I'm also a very logical person. And I also think about things from a very broad perspective. I don't just like to narrow my mind to one construct. And I don't believe that God is a linear God that just says A, or B. There's always a gray area when we look at things, and I like to think about things from a gray area, especially when it comes to life. Because when it comes to life, we're not just talking about killing a child or bringing in a child. There are so many facets that come into play. So for me personally, I would say me and my partner have to sit down and holistically think about it and come up with a solution, with a plan. And if we choose to take out the child, then we also have to plan about life after making that decision, because it comes with pressure, it comes with guilt, it comes with fear, it comes with, oh my God, God might be so upset with me. What if God does not bless me with another child after this experience? All these have to come into play. It comes with going back to God, or if you're Catholic, for instance, you have to go for confession because you've just murdered a child. You have to go to the pulpit and ask the priest for forgiveness. You have to ask God through the priest for forgiveness for murder. So you're considered a murderer based on Catholicism. And then if you're not a Catholic or you're a Christian, it's still considered murder, because you now have to think about the fact that this child could have had a life if you made a different decision. But then looking at it from a scientific point of view, you're now thinking about the fact that you're bringing in a child that medical practitioners could want to take on for experiments, because they might say, okay, your child's case is so unique, is so significant, we want to give you free access to medication, but you have to give us access to your child to perform surgery A, perform surgery B that have never been performed
experimental
on any, thank you, experimental surgeries on that child, that you don't even know if that child wants to go through all of that. You don't know if that child will be able to withstand whatever side effects, because they have not been recorded. You don't even know if the child is willing to take on any pain that might come from it. So these are the factors that we need to think about. And for me personally, it just depends in a lot of things. And I wouldn't say that I will take out the child or I will keep the child. I would say that I will have to go into deep considerations based on everything that I've just mentioned.
All right,
I think I have to agree with you. My answer.
Why are you guys just agreeing with each other?
It really is a complicated thing to think about, because both sides have their own caveats. So you have to think of, if you do go ahead to terminate the pregnancy, you have to think of the repercussions that come with that, both personal and societal. You're dealing with your own guilt. You're dealing with everyone else's guilt that you decide to pour on you. You're dealing with like religious concerns, cultural concerns. All those things come into play. And if you do decide to keep the baby, you also do have to think about the financial burden, the societal burden as well, the everything that comes with it. So it can never be black and white. You have to, she's right, you have to consider the factors around you, your financial status, you and your partner's decision, where your environment and things like that. And just to speak on your point of like medical experimentations, I think at the end of the day, you do have a choice on what happens to your child, and your child also has a say if they are old enough. So there is such a thing as autonomy. So irrespective of what your doctor tells you is best for your child, you have a right to say yes or no. So those are things that you also have to consider. You may feel like, I don't want to put my child through this pain, but this may be what is best for this child. There's just so many things to have to look at and consider if you want to go ahead and do it or otherwise. So I can't say for certain if it's a yes or no, because it would be nice to sit here and say, you know what, I would not do it, or you know what, I would do it, or things like that, because you never really know what the factors will be around you if it does come to happen to you eventually, essentially.
Well, interesting, because I know you're speaking from a medical point of view. So personally, I would say if it's a threat to my life, I definitely will take it out, because we have seen pregnancies that gave the mother a 50-50 option. It's either you or the child goes. Some parents want to take the risk of saying, you know what, let me just have that child, you know, let the doctor try. And we end up losing both the mother and the child. Baby. You know, some cases, on few occasions, doctors can save both. But if it has become a threat to my life as an individual, best believe I would. You know, I would take that out. And then something else I'm considering when having a child like this, you also already have children. That's if you have other children. Think of how having this child would affect your other children, and not just the presence of the child, the attention of a mother. Because once you have a child that has special needs, best believe that you would give most of the time and the attention to that child, because they eat a specific way, they can't be in certain harsh conditions, weather conditions. You shop for them a specific way. While you are taking every other person out, that child might not be fit to go outside, not because of how they look, but because of, you know, the effect of the environment on them, on their health as children. So these are certain things that I would also consider. And yes, it would be nice to say, because I see that in this part of the world, what we do most times is, yes, I would not do it. You have done it. It is wrong. But sometimes life is not always black or white.
Yeah,
so and we fail to understand that part, that life is not always black or white. And you know, some people will say, as a Christian, you should never do this, you should never. But even God made room for these things that are likely to happen. This is not to say we should make very callous decisions by saying, oh, that child has a bow leg, I'm taking the child out. Oh, that child doesn't look light skinned. You know, I got into a biracial marriage because I wanted the child to look like a half caste, which is why most of us, you know what I mean, you know, which is why most of us, some people who do this biracial marriage end up getting married like that. And they say, oh, I don't want this child because the child does not look like the half caste that I was thinking.
Dark.
This is eugenics now, wanting a specific thing for a child. But like you said, we should draw a very specific line between these and that.
Well, in respect to whether there's a risk to the mother, so in the condition that Solombuchi is talking about, Down syndrome, it has, we consider some fetal abnormalities lethal and non-lethal.
Yeah.
So some that would exist, can survive outside of pregnancy, and some that are most likely going to, because we say potentially lethal rather, so it's most likely going to die or not survive outside of pregnancy. So in terms of Down syndrome, it has a very high probability of survival because most of the, it's a spectrum, but most of the complications that come with it are manageable and treatable. You also have some other abnormalities like trisomy 13, that's Foetal syndrome. Those other ones, they don't come, they are usually lethal. So in those situations, you would see parents say things like, there's almost no point, you might as well terminate. So you see some other people tell you that you don't know what God can do, this child can come out and be miraculously healthy. So it's still, there are decisions to make irrespective of it, but in terms of whether there's a risk to the mother, we always consider and counsel our patients according to whether there's a risk to the mother, whether the baby has a chance of survival, and ultimately the decision always comes down to the mother. And I think in terms of the baby being or the child being a burden to her siblings, definitely that's true. We've all been online, we've seen this glass child talk of a parent having a particular child they have to take care of in particular because of how the child is and how they interact with their siblings. And I think it's important to note that there's no child that is easy in the sense. There's, every sibling will have their conflicts, so it's good to not necessarily paint a child as this trouble, but we cannot deny the facts. There are things that they will face, essentially. So it's important to also just look at the entire picture if we want to make those decisions.
Okay. Not as them being a problem to the child. But yeah, what I literally meant is the mother would not have time
that's
to care
definitely, that's what the glass
care
child
for
thing
the
is,
other.
because essentially that's...
Is that a theory? Is that like
it's
a
called
proper
a glass,
theory?
a glass child effect or something like that, where they have to be very fragile with this child because this child is very fragile, essentially, because even the way they interact with their siblings, they are very temperamental, different things, different interactions with it, so they have to be in a particular extra protective with that particular child
because of how they are. All right, the next question will be approach to things like this. You know, when we have conversations like this and we see people put absolute statements out there, just like Solomon has done, you know, talking about this, at what point are we able to regulate some of these things that are being put out there? What do you think other regulations or frameworks should exist regarding control of choices just like this? You know that Charlie Kirk, the American Turning Point, you know, this is something like this. And I see Solomon trying to, you know, be there saying, absolutely, I'm for Jesus, just like the guy was saying. But when we had that conversation, I said, you can apply diplomacy to certain conversations like this, not because you are scared of the people you are speaking against, not because you have any sort of restrictions, but because that's what being human requires: diplomacy and, you know, intelligence, especially when speaking about things that you have not experienced yourself. So what other approaches do you think should exist regarding people like this?
Okay, well, for me, I would say that I would like to play devil's advocate, right? Even coming from the point of a Christian, because most Christians will say there's a reason why God gave you that child. You know, regardless of if you have the resources or not, you can say, oh, God gave you this child because you're the kind of mother that this child needs, or you're the kind of parents, or you're excuse me, you're born in the environment that this child can be raised in. But at the same time, we have to think about it from a societal point of view as well. We have, and in a society like Nigeria, we have NGOs or governmental institutions like NCDC, that's for healthcare, where they work with organizations like World Health Organization or even Bill Gates, who sends funding down to Nigeria to be able to give access to medical treatments and, you know, just funding to be able to treat situations like Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, sickle cell anemia, just so many things. And we have to think about that. While Christians and other religions are thinking about situations where it's a God thing, you know, it's linear, we have to keep the child. Children are blessings, children come with blessings. They also have to work in line with these organizations because they are here to help. As much as you may see that, and another thing is also information and education. If you're not able to give access to these organizations, to these Christian households or groups, or let me not say Christian, faith-based, that's a better use of word, faith-based, because it could be Christian, it could be Muslim, it could be traditional. If they don't have access to these organizations, how are we going to create a society where we can work hand to hand and actually create an environment for people with disabilities to live amongst us? And just like she said, down to a regular having a path or a trolley for wheelchairs within public areas like the mall, or we only see this in hospitals because that's where they're expected to be. We don't see them in malls, we don't see them in the cinemas like you mentioned, we don't even see them in the marketplace. So for instance, someone with Down syndrome gets to a point of age where they're supposed to take care of themselves, their parents are there, how would they shop for themselves? What kind of jobs do they do? I was watching something and somewhere in Southeast Asia where a restaurant was dedicated to just employing people with disabilities. I think they were burn victims that had issues with their faces or scars. That
was in India.
Was it India? I'm not sure, but I know it's somewhere in Asia, Southeast Asia. I can't remember the country. And we can incorporate something like that in Nigeria. A job board or a job service could say, okay, we're dedicated to just connecting people with disabilities to employers who are willing to work with these people, even if it's in a restaurant, even if it's with a call center, even if it's in marketing, whatever kind of job construct, just to give them an opportunity to be inclusive and be a part of society. So from my point of view, I just think that this is how we can incorporate these norms, working with government institutions, working with state institutions, and also religious or faith-based institutions to be able to create a better environment for cohabitation with people with disabilities and people that are considered regular or normal people.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I think it's important to approach these conversations with nuance at the back of your mind. You need to remember that nothing is an absolute and nothing is this set in stone thing. It's easy for people like Charlie Kirk and Solomon Bucci to approach conversations and say, this is it and this is how it must be. But nothing exists that way. There's nuance in everything. And Nigerians as a whole tend to approach conversations this way before we can even get to having conversations about employing this and this and that, or instituting this and this and that. We tend to approach conversations as absolutes and not seeing different perspectives or not even having empathy when we want to discuss certain things. So I feel like this whole approach that we have is something that we actually would need to address if we want to see something improve in the way we want to handle these situations, because it's easy to sit again on your high horse and say, you know what, this should not be done, this should not be that, this should not
when
be
you're
that.
not in that position.
Exactly.
Not there.
So the first thing we would need to do is people in society in general need to learn to approach things with a little bit of empathy rather than rush quickly to judgment and rush to this is not how it should be done or this is how it should be done. I feel like that's the best thing we need to approach first and foremost.
And you know, for some reason, he doesn't like to hear that judgment thing. Yes, I judge you, I judge you. There are conversations that we have as Nigerians that we need to be firm, because we need to establish that while we'll have, you know, certain conversations with this nuances at the back of our minds, we also need to have there's conversations that you should approach absolutely.
I think even those conversations, should also be approached with some form of
empathy.
You can say, yes, this is wrong, but I feel like it's such a wisdom to be able to say.
You are making a case for Shegumi right now, because there are certain things that you would absolutely condemn because of the nature of those things. It's not a case of choice now.
Definitely.
When we're talking about insecurity, it's not a case of whether the person should or shouldn't do it. You shouldn't even do it in the first place. So there are conversations that you should approach with absolute, conclusions. Don't do it. You don't go about killing people because you don't like them.
People,
exactly. But conversations that have to do with emotions, that have to do with, specific choices, especially in relations to health as well. These are conversations that you need to approach. Exactly. Yeah. So because this phrase of "don't judge me" has become too common, in the social space. Even when someone is doing something that is absolutely condemnable, they don't want to be spoken to because they have the freedom of choice. And so in a bid to be more empathetic or empathic towards someone's plight, right, we also need to learn at some point to know conversations that need absolute conclusions.
To put our foot down in certain things.
Exactly. To put our foot down on certain things, not just because it is comfortable or convenient to do, but because we know that that's the right thing to be done. And I think you have said the most things that we have to say here today regarding these Solomon Mombochi's conversation. It's important to embody some level of empathy towards somebody. You're not in it, so you don't know. And then this ability of people to recognize that we would approach things differently is something that we should know. Because I don't approach it like you does not make me a bad person or completely an irresponsible person. Because I don't say it like you does not mean,
That's
so
people feel
exactly
like that's what people need to learn. That's what people need to learn to apply.
Exactly. So it's applied everywhere, not just in Solomon Buchi. Every single phase of life, it's important for you to recognize that your thoughts are not the only thoughts. Other ones exist outside of what you think as well. Thank you so much for joining us on the conversation this morning.
Thank you for having us.
It's been, see, you guys are smiling. It's been an absolute delight having you here, and I definitely love to have the conversation. But remember, we are active across social media platforms on Facebook, on Instagram, on X, and on TikTok. It is at Rapid TV. Our website, www.rbnradiotv.com, allows you to connect with us from anywhere in the world. And on YouTube, it is at Official Rapid TV. Send the video probably to Solomon and anybody that needs to understand, certain parts of this conversation. Thank you for being here with us. My name is Mata Alu, and I will see you tomorrow.